The Grand Hall of the Galactic Confederation glittered under a 100,000 artificial stars. Representatives from every major species filled the massive amphitheater, their voices buzzing in 1,000 languages, 1,000 worries. And yet there was one seat that held more weight than the rest. The human delegation, Ambassador Ella Carter, sat stiffly at the long obsidian table, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. Her suit, tailored for power, fit her like armor. Beside her sat General Marcus Vane, the human military's representative, broad-shouldered and quiet, his face unreadable. Both of them had heard the whispers, the mocking tones slipping from the other delegates when they thought humans couldn't hear. The humans are weak, the humans are emotional, they won't dare to start a war. Elaine clenched her jaw. They had come here to talk peace after the Brask uprising, to mend wounds the Confederation had inflicted. After decades of loyalty, humanity had been betrayed, stabbed in the back during the skirmishes on Taxis 4. Their colonies had been left undefended. Their civilians had been slaughtered. And now the Confederation wanted to negotiate without even offering an apology. A chime sounded across the hall. President Valor of the Confederation, a shimmering serpent-like creature from the Valari race, floated to the central podium. His translucent skin shimmered with self-importance as he began to speak. "Esteemed members," he said, his voice slick as oil, "we gather to extend our olive branch to humanity. Let us move past misunderstandings." Elaine's fingers twitched. Misunderstandings, the bodies buried under the rubble of New Geneva would call it something else. Massacre, betrayal, cowardice. General Vane leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "They're playing us for fools." She didn't need the reminder. The Val-Ari continued, "It would be unfortunate if humanity chose to escalate matters. After all, no species thrives alone." The room filled with polite chuckles, not from the humans. Elaine stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the obsidian floor. Every head turned. Her voice when she spoke was clear, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Ambassador Carter of Earth speaking," she announced. "We came in good faith, we buried our dead, rebuilt our homes, and believed that justice would prevail. Instead, we find mockery." The hall grew still. No one expected the humans to call it out. No one expected them to be angry. Elaine continued, her voice gathering strength, "We are not here to beg for scraps of dignity. We are not here to forget the innocent lives lost for the sake of your politics." President Valor's face tightened. He tried to cut in, but she raised her hand, silencing him. "You took our trust," she said, her voice now low and dangerous, and spat on it. "You believe our humanity is a weakness. You think because we grieve, because we hope that we won't fight, you are wrong." General Vane stood up beside her. Across the hall, a few more humans, scientists, diplomats, soldiers rose too, a slow, deliberate movement. "We hereby withdraw from the Confederation peace talks," Elaine declared, "effective immediately." Gasps echoed from every corner of the room. The Valori president looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You cannot simply," he began. "We can," Marcus Vane interrupted, his voice a growly growl, "and we will." With mechanical precision, the human delegation turned and walked away. Their boots thudded against the polished floor like war drums. The other species watched, frozen, some with disbelief, some with fear, because deep down they remembered what humanity was capable of when it was cornered. They remembered Earth's wars, Earth's survival, Earth's unbreakable spirit. They realized too late that they hadn't insulted a fragile species. They had poked a beast. And now that beast was walking away, teeth bared and patience gone. The humans didn't just walk out of the hall. They walked out of the Confederation itself. The human ships waiting in orbit received the message within minutes. Without hesitation, the massive fleet turned away from the diplomatic stations and headed back toward Earth. No posturing, no warnings, just a cold, silent withdrawal. Within hours, the Confederation's private communications channels exploded in panic. Some called for emergency meetings. Others demanded sanctions. A few, the wiser few, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was already too late. On the bridge of the UHS Resolute, Admiral Kira Monroe watched the Starfield shift as the ship jumped into hyperspace. She had been briefed on the situation minutes before the withdrawal. Her orders were simple: return home, prepare. "Set course for Sol Prime," she said, her voice calm. But inside she felt the fire building. Humanity had played nice for too long. They had been the peacekeepers, the bridge builders, the idealists, no more. As the Resolute sped through the slipstream, Kira opened the classified files that had been quietly distributed to every human warship in the fleet. Projects that had been kept secret even from most Confederation allies. Weapons humanity had never needed or never dared to use. Until now. Back at the Confederation Central Command, chaos brewed behind gilded walls. A crisis council had been called. No cameras, no public announcements, just fear thick and clinging to every corner of the marble chamber. President Veer paced in front of his aides. "We underestimated them," he admitted, his scales flickering darkly. "They are emotional, but emotion drives them, it fuels them." Admiral Exar of the Brask, a hulking insectoid creature, shifted uneasily. "They've always been dangerous." Even during peace, they expanded faster than any race, innovated faster, fought harder. And now, asked Councillor Murren of the Lethari, a species known for their cold logic. Now we have given them every reason to become our enemies. Vior slumped into his seat. We must find a way to contain them before they retaliate. Retaliate, the word hung in the air, heavier than gravity, because deep in their shared history books they all remembered Earth's darkest moments. They remembered the Terran Wars when humanity had nearly torn itself apart and somehow survived. They remembered the Scourge campaigns where humans had faced extinction-level events and clawed their way back from oblivion. They remembered that humans didn't just fight wars, they became wars. Back on Earth, news of the peace talk breakdown spread like wildfire. Governments united overnight. Factories that had been idle since the last interstellar treaty roared back to life. Sleeper fleets hidden on the dark side of moons reactivated. Ancient war protocols, once locked away as relics of a violent past, flashed back to operational status. And the people didn't panic. They prepared. They remembered the videos of their burned colonies. They remembered the smug faces of alien diplomats offering hollow apologies. And they remembered in the marrow of their bones that humanity had always survived by doing the one thing they did better than any other species: getting angry. Ella Carter watched from the observation deck of the human command ship, her hands resting lightly on the railing as she stared into the swirling colors of hyperspace. "This isn't revenge," she said quietly to herself. "It's survival." And far across the stars, where petty politicians still argued over treaties and reparations, somewhere deep inside every alien heart that had laughed at humanity's pain, a cold, creeping fear began to grow. They had not seen humanity's wrath yet, but they would soon. The first blow wasn't loud. It didn't come with a grand fleet tearing across the stars or a declaration of war broadcasted to the galaxy. It came in silence. Confederation trade routes, once bustling highways of goods and diplomacy, started collapsing one by one. Ships found their systems hacked mid-jump. Their navigation scrambled by viruses so advanced even the Lethari couldn't untangle them. Cargo vanished. Supplies dried up. Whole sectors went dark, isolated by invisible hands, and not a single human ship was seen. On Traxxas 5, a Valeri mining outpost reported a sudden drop in power levels. Before they could send a distress call, their reactors overloaded and shorted out. No explosions, no casualties, just a blackout that left them stranded, shivering under the cold stars. The humans weren't fighting with guns. They were fighting with brilliance, precision, ruthlessness. Back on Earth, General Marcus Vane stood before a room full of military commanders, scientists, and political leaders. The room was dark, illuminated only by a giant holographic map of the galaxy with key Confederation systems marked in red. "We're not waging war," he said, his voice even. "We're teaching them fear." He pointed at the map and system after system began blinking, a pattern emerging that only a human mind could truly appreciate. "We will make them doubt every light they see in the sky," he continued. "Every transmission, every promise of safety will remind them why humanity was always considered too dangerous to truly trust." Admiral Monroe stepped forward. "Phase 2 is ready, sir." Marcus nodded once. "Begin." Meanwhile, at the Confederation High Command, the leaders were unraveling. "Entire sectors are reporting technical failures," Admiral Extar hissed, his wings twitching furiously. "Our ships won't jump, our communication buoys are offline." "It's sabotage," Myron said, her tone sharp with alarm. "Coordinated, deliberate." President Vaylor clutched his head, the gleam of his skin dimming with stress. "They're destabilizing our entire infrastructure without firing a single shot. How is this possible?" An underling scurried forward, trembling. "Sir, we've intercepted fragments of code left in the wreckage of the navigation relays. It's human, old human." "Old," Vaylor snapped. "Yes, sir," the aide said, swallowing hard. "Pre-Confederation era military grade, it's brutal, no fail-safes. It doesn't just disrupt systems, it teaches them to self-destruct." The room fell into a sickening silence. Old human warfare wasn't elegant. It was raw, merciless, designed in an era when survival meant annihilating threats completely. The Confederation had forgotten that part of humanity, but humanity hadn't. In a desperate attempt to save face, the Confederation ordered a peace envoy, an emergency delegation of diplomats, soldiers, and scholars to travel to Earth and offer formal reparations. The humans received the request and ignored it. Days passed, weeks. The Confederation began losing border colonies to chaos. Minor species that had once relied on the Confederation for protection now found themselves vulnerable and angry. Pirates, warlords, and rebel cells sprang up like weeds, emboldened by the sudden collapse of law and order. The Confederation was rotting from the inside, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. Still no human fleets, still no mass invasions, just silence and fear. Elaine Carter watched the reports from the command deck of the UHS Dominion. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, calm and steady. "How long until they break?" she asked, not turning. General Vane, standing beside her, answered without hesitation. "They're already broken, they just don't know it yet." She nodded, her voice as cold as space itself. "Then it's time they learned." In the vast emptiness between the stars, humanity waited. Not for permission, not for forgiveness, but for the perfect moment to strike the final blow. And this time when it came, the galaxy would have no warning, no second chance, just the raw, unstoppable fury of a species that had been mocked, wounded, and now fully awake. The first true strike hit the Confederation core worlds like a hammer. It wasn't missiles or bombs, it was worse. At exactly 2:00 hours Confederation Central Time, every major financial hub across 27 inhabited planets collapsed. Bank accounts were wiped clean, corporate systems melted under precision data attacks, power grids overloaded, trade fleets lost all command signals and drifted helplessly. The Confederation's heart didn't just skip a beat. It flatlined. News feeds, once carefully controlled to Project Stability, couldn't hide the chaos anymore. Footage leaked. Panicked citizens looting supply centers, military officers abandoning posts, planets declaring independence overnight. And through it all, not a single human soldier had stepped onto a Confederation world. On Earth, in a war room buried deep beneath the mountains, Elaine Carter stood before a quiet, waiting crowd. "Our goal was never conquest," she said. "It was respect." The men and women in the room, hardened commanders, strategists, and survivors of 100 broken treaties, nodded grimly. "They had their chance at peace," she continued. "They chose arrogance, they chose betrayal." She turned toward General Vane, who was already keying in the next phase. "Now," she said, voiced like iron, "they will learn humility." Above the ruined economies of the Confederation, new signals began to broadcast from seemingly nowhere. Human-made satellites, hidden, cloaked, and buried deep within neutral space, sprang to life, pushing a single message across every channel in every language. "You should have remembered what we are. Now you will." Confederation leaders scrambled to respond. Emergency councils were called, new treaties drafted. They begged, pleaded, offered resources, planets, even tribute. But humanity didn't answer, not yet. Instead, human science vessels arrived at neutral colonies, not with weapons but with aid. Medicine, food, clean water, technology, all free. No demands, no political posturing. The colonies, abandoned by the Confederation, welcomed the humans with open arms. It wasn't just a war of bombs anymore, it was a war of hearts. Confederation loyalists screamed betrayal. Neutral systems called it salvation. And the cracks in the once mighty Confederation turned into gaping wounds. At the Confederation High Command, panic had twisted into something worse, despair. "They're winning the outer systems," Admiral Exar said, his mandibles clicking nervously without firing a shot. President Vaylor leaned heavily against the command table, his skin so dim it looked almost gray. "We tried to control them," he rasped. "Now we have nothing left to offer but surrender." "And would they even accept it?" Murren asked bitterly, "after what we did?" No one answered because deep down they all knew the truth. Humanity had outgrown them. They had thought the humans were children, wild, emotional, reckless. They hadn't realized that the humans were something else entirely, survivors, builders, and when provoked, destroyers. On the bridge of the Dominion, Elaine watched the newest reports flow in, worlds flipping allegiance, Confederation fleets defecting, unwilling to die for a government that had already abandoned them. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "They're ready," General Vane said beside her. Elaine nodded. "Then it's time to make them an offer." "Terms of surrender?" he asked. "No," she said, her eyes burning, "terms of existence. Because this was no longer about justice. This was about reshaping the galaxy itself, and humanity wasn't going to ask for a seat at the table anymore. They were going to build a new one on the ruins of everything that had dared to betray them. The message went out across every surviving Confederation channel, cutting into broadcasts, overriding local networks, flashing onto every screen from the core worlds to the edge of explored space. It was simple, ruthless, unmistakably human. A single black screen, white text burning bright. "The Confederation is dead. A new order is coming. You have one choice: join us or be forgotten." There were no negotiations, no second offers, no smiling diplomats. The galaxy, which once thought itself mighty, was now on its knees before a species it had spent centuries underestimating. On Earth, the United Human Council, newly formed, united for the first time in history without internal factions, watched the responses pour in. Outlying planets rushed to pledge allegiance, desperate for protection. Former allies of the Confederation scrambled to declare neutrality or beg forgiveness. Even some high-ranking Confederation officials quietly sent offers to defect, to serve, to survive. And the core Confederation worlds, they hesitated. They still believed in their arrogance that humanity would allow them to bargain. Ella Carter leaned forward over the conference table, her hands steepled under her chin. "Hit them," she ordered, cold and final, no hesitation. Within minutes, coordinated human strike teams, cybernetic specialists, orbital skirmishers, stealth fleets descended like phantoms on the remaining Confederation strongholds. No cities were bombed. No civilian populations were slaughtered. Instead, command centers blinked off the grid. Military installations found their targeting systems turned against them. Key government officials simply disappeared. One by one, the Confederation's last pillars crumbled to dust. At Confederation High Command, President Vaylor watched the final reports trickle in, his body sagging under the weight of realization. "We should have feared them," he whispered. Beside him, Myron closed her many eyes, her voice a hollow shell of what it once was. "We mocked them for being ruled by emotion. We forgot that rage is an emotion too." Across the galaxy, planets lit their skies with new banners, black and silver, emblazoned with the sigil of humanity. Not a symbol of conquest, a symbol of survival. A warning to every species who thought mercy was weakness, a promise that Earth would never bow again. On the bridge of the UHS Dominion, Elaine Carter stood watching the stars drift by. General Marcus Vane came to stand beside her, handing her a tablet displaying the full surrender of the last Confederation stronghold. "We've won," he said. Elaine didn't smile, didn't cheer, she just stared into the dark, endless night. "This isn't the end," she said quietly, "it's just the beginning." Because humans weren't just survivors anymore. They were the architects of a new era. An era born from betrayal, forged in rage, tempered by loss. An era where no one would ever dare to underestimate them again. From that day forward, across every corner of the galaxy, two unspoken truths would reign. Never betray a human, never corner a beast. And humanity, once mocked for their fragile emotions, now ruled with an iron will that no force could ever break. In the months that followed the Confederation's fall, the galaxy changed in ways no one could have predicted. Human patrol fleets now swept across the star lanes, not as invaders but as enforcers. Piracy plummeted to near extinction. Trade resumed between worlds that had been left to rot by the old Confederation. Diseases that had ravaged colonies for decades were wiped out within weeks, thanks to human medical breakthroughs that had once been hidden away, hoarded by corrupt Confederation councils. For many, life actually became better, safer. But beneath the order, something darker simmered. Humanity hadn't just stepped into the Confederation's shoes. They'd burned the shoes, scattered the ashes, and built boots of their own. Boots meant for marching, not for diplomacy. The Human Council called it the stabilization. A galaxy rebuilt under humanity's protection, yes, but also under humanity's watchful, unforgiving gaze. Every planetary governor, every corporate magnate, every fleet admiral was hand-picked, approved by Earth command centers, and vetted for loyalty to the new order. Freedom still existed, but it had tight borders now. Justice was swift and mercy was rationed. In the shadows of shining cities and prosperous colonies, resentment began to grow, small at first, quiet but real. On the mining world of Rissar 3, a group of alien workers whispered in hidden tunnels. They spoke of human arrogance, of betrayal. They remembered promises of partnership that now looked more like domination. On the agricultural moon of Lististra, a Lithari elder watched human engineers optimize their sacred fields, turning ancient traditions into efficient, soulless farming grids. She smiled at the soldiers and nodded at the officials, but in her heart she buried a seed of hate. And on the old ruins of Taxis 4, where so much human blood had been spilled during the Brask betrayal, something worse stirred. Not resentment, not whispers, plans. Human intelligence agencies, far sharper now than the Confederation's bloated bureaucracies, picked up traces, words caught in intercepted messages: rebellion, restoration, revenge. General Marcus Vane sat with Elaine Carter in the Situation Room deep inside Earth's fortified command complex. Reports filled the holographic table between them, unrest growing like cracks in ice. "They're ungrateful," Marcus said, his voice low and full of iron. "We saved them, they owe us." Elaine didn't answer immediately. She stared at a slow-spinning map of the galaxy, dots blinking where incidents of sabotage, protests, and low-level terrorism had been recorded. Finally, she said, "No species likes being ruled, even by those who saved them." Marcus snorted. "We gave them security." "And took their pride," she replied. He studied her, frowning. "You don't regret what we did, do you?" She met his gaze, steady as the pull of gravity. "No, it was necessary, but don't mistake survival for loyalty, Marcus. They will rise against us eventually." "And when they do," he asked. Elaine's smile was cold, almost pitying. "We'll remind them again." Across the stars, the human dominion, as the galaxy had come to call it, tightened its grip. But cracks were appearing. Small alliances formed between races that had once despised each other, bonded now by a common fear of their human rulers. Secret gatherings discussed ancient weapons, lost technologies, hidden systems untouched by human hands. They spoke of patience, of striking when the beast grew comfortable, when it forgot that fear could be a double-edged sword. But humanity had survived worse. They had clawed their way back from worse betrayals, deeper wounds, and Earth itself, it had become something new, not just a planet, but a fortress. Layers of defenses wrapped it like armor. Orbital rings bristled with cannons that could slice a fleet in half. 1,000 sleeper ships hidden in deep space stood ready to strike at any uprising. The galaxy thought it could wait for humanity to grow weak. It didn't realize humanity had been forged by waiting, by enduring, by preparing. On the observation deck of the UHS Dominion, Elaine Carter watched Earth spinning below. "Beautiful, terrible, unbreakable," she said softly. Beside her, Marcus Vane crossed his arms, "until it's not." And somewhere in the deep cold between stars, seeds of rebellion cracked open, unaware that they weren't sowing freedom. They were sowing their own destruction. Again, it started with a whisper. On Listra Moon, a shipment bound for a human outpost vanished in transit. No distress call, no wreckage, just an empty shipping lane where a freighter used to be. At first, Command assumed it was pirates. After all, small-time raiders still prowled the edges of space. But then another freighter disappeared, and a third. Within a month, entire convoys were being picked off in deep space. Their signals scrambled, their escorts bypassed, as if the enemy knew exactly where to hit. General Marcus Vane reviewed the footage personally. What he saw made his blood run cold. Highly coordinated attacks executed with brutal efficiency. Whoever was behind this wasn't improvising. They were organized, trained, they had been preparing. "We underestimated them," he admitted to Elaine Carter in a rare moment of frustration. "We thought they were scattered, broken." Elaine sat at the head of the council table, fingers drumming lightly against the polished steel. Around her, holograms floated, reports of sabotage, uprisings, even assassinations of human officials in distant systems. "They're not trying to defeat us," she said, her voice low. "They're trying to make us bleed." And they were succeeding. Human supply lines stretched thin across the stars, trying to hold the fragile new order together. Every attack chipped away at morale, at control, at the image of invincibility humanity had built so carefully. On the mining world of Rice-Rar 3, a rebel broadcast pierced through human jamming fields for the first time. Grainy footage showed alien workers raising banners, not Confederation banners but a new symbol, a black circle broken by a silver lightning bolt, the symbol of resistance. The message was short, defiant. "We remember, we endure, we rise." Across the Dominion, other systems stirred. Planets that had accepted human aid began questioning the price of their salvation. Governors hesitated. Soldiers looked over their shoulders, wondering if the friend beside them might turn traitor. Elaine knew this was coming. She had expected it, but not so soon. At a meeting of the Dominion's high command, tempers flared. "We should crush them," Admiral Monroe barked. "Make examples of the rebel worlds, show them what defiance costs." "And drive 100 more systems into their arms," snapped Director Howerin of the Intelligence Division. "Brute force won't work this time." Marcus Vane stood silently at the end of the room, arms crossed, until Elaine nodded for him to speak. "We built our power on fear," he said. "But fear fades, memory fades, we need something more." Elaine tilted her head, "Go-ons." Vane leaned over the holographic map of Dominion space. Red dots marked rebel activity, a slow, spreading cancer. "We don't just retaliate," he said. "We rewrite the war, control the narrative, turn every rebellion into a tragedy. Not for us, but for them. Make them doubt, make them regret." Elaine's eyes gleamed. It was ruthless, cold, perfect. Within days, Operation Iron Veil was launched. It started small. News feeds broadcasting stories of rebel attacks killing innocent civilians. Images, some real, some carefully edited, of rebel heroes turning on their own people, causing famine, disease, collapse. In a galaxy wired together by information, truth became just another weapon. Rebel movements struggled to hold their support. Whispers spread that perhaps the humans weren't the monsters after all. That maybe, just maybe, life under Dominion rule was better than life in endless chaos. But the resistance wasn't naive. They adapted. Leaders like Ares Kellen, a Lethari war veteran, emerged from the shadows, rallying planets not just with promises of freedom, but with brutal, simple math: fight now or live forever under the human boot. Under Kellen's leadership, cells merged, resources pooled, plans tightened. The rebels learned from humanity. They grew smarter, harder, and in the dark corners of the galaxy where no human eyes watched, they began to build weapons humanity hadn't seen before. Weapons born from stolen human tech twisted by alien hands. For the first time since the fall of the Confederation, humanity faced an enemy that didn't just survive under pressure. They thrived in it. On the Dominion's observation deck, Elaine Carter watched the latest encrypted messages come in, her jaw tight. They're evolving, Marcus said, reading over her shoulder. Elaine didn't respond immediately. She simply stared into the deep black beyond the glass where the future waited, bloody and uncertain. We taught them too well, she murmured at last. And somewhere in the galaxy, hidden by shattered moons and dead suns, the Resistance sharpened its blades, ready to carve its message into the stars. We endure, we rise, we are coming. The first real battle wasn't fought in space. It was fought on a dead world called Kaor's Reach, a forgotten rock once used for mineral extraction, now little more than ruins and dust storms, but for the rebels it was the perfect ground, and for humanity it would become a line they could not afford to lose. General Marcus Vane stood aboard the UHS Resolute, overlooking the scarred surface below. Rebel forces had fortified the ruins, dug tunnels, built hidden gun nests. It was a fortress born from desperation and cunning. Marcus turned to Elaine Carter, who stood beside him, helmet under one arm. "They're daring us to come down," he said grimly. Elaine nodded, her face hard. "Then we'll answer." The invasion began at dawn. Dropships screamed through Kaor's thin atmosphere, unleashing squads of elite human soldiers, the Dominion's finest. They moved like ghosts, cutting through outer defenses, hammering into the rebel lines. But this time the rebels didn't run. They didn't scatter like frightened animals, they fought. For every trench humanity took, they lost good men and women. For every bunker cleared, 3 more sprang up. The rebels moved with brutal efficiency, using old Confederation tunnels to launch surprise attacks, ambushes, sabotage. By nightfall, the dusty plains ran red with blood, human and alien alike. Elaine stood in the command center, grimacing as casualty reports flooded in. "They've unified," Marcus said, watching the battle unfold on a wall of holographic screens. "Different species, different tactics, but one cause." Elaine exhaled slowly, forcing down the flicker of anger in her chest. "We forced them to find common ground," she said. "We turned enemies into brothers, and now they were paying the price." Outside, the battle raged with a ferocity that stunned even hardened Dominion veterans. Rebel banners, the broken circle and lightning bolt, flew defiantly over captured human artillery posts. Old Confederation war machines, resurrected and modified, rolled out of hidden bunkers, blasting apart human positions. For the first time since humanity had risen to dominance, it tasted bitter, undeniable resistance. In the burning ruins of Kaor's central city, Marcus and Elaine personally led the final assault. Blaster fire tore through the smoke-thick air. Soldiers screamed. The ground shook under the roar of ancient tanks and orbital bombardments. Marcus slammed into cover behind a collapsed wall, blood trickling from a gash above his brow. Elaine crouched beside him, pistol drawn. "This isn't just rebellion," he shouted over the chaos. "It's a movement." Elaine's teeth clenched. She fired into the mist, dropping a rebel soldier who had gotten too close. "Then we end it here now." They pushed forward, their soldiers rallying behind them. Street by bloody street, they clawed their way toward the rebel command center. An old mining control tower turned into a fortress. Inside, Eris Kellen waited. The Lethari war leader, scarred and unbowed, stood before a battered console, watching the human advance. He knew the end was near, but it didn't matter. Around him, rebel survivors armed explosive charges, prepared last stands, readied themselves to die. Because victory wasn't measured by survival anymore. It was measured by the memory they would leave behind. As human forces burst into the tower, blasters lighting up the darkness, Kellen activated the final command. Across Ka's Reach, explosives rigged deep underground detonated. Not enough to destroy the planet, but enough to bury every human soldier under tons of rubble. Elaine and Marcus barely had time to realize what was happening. "Get out," Marcus bellowed, shoving soldiers toward the drop ships. Elaine grabbed a wounded Marine and dragged him across the shaking ground, heart hammering as towers crumbled and firestorms roared through the streets. Above them, the sky split with desperate evacuation ships trying to escape the inferno. Hours later, orbiting high above the dead, burning world, the cost was clear. Thousands dead, ships lost, humanity's illusion of invincibility shattered. Elaine sat in the medbay, blood smeared across her armor, her mind numb with exhaustion. "They made their choice," Marcus said, voice rough, face bandaged as he stood at her side. Elaine looked up at him, eyes burning. "And so will we." Because Ka's Reach wasn't a defeat, it was a warning. The galaxy wouldn't be ruled by kindness, it would be ruled by fire. And if they wanted war, if they wanted to rise against Earth, humanity would meet them with a fury they had never seen before. No more mercy, no more patience, no more chances. The beast had been awakened once. Now it would never sleep.